Hi, and welcome to a brief introduction to vulnerability disclosure from the researcher perspective, a talk that's almost shorter than the title of the talk. I'm Ellis. I'm the VP of Community and Public Affairs at Rapid7, a security company. And I've been involved in vulnerability disclosure from both sides of the table. I've worked as the representative of a technology provider, concerned about reputational impact, that kind of stuff. And then I've also worked on the other side, working with researchers to make a disclosure, and I work on public policy around this topic as well. So I've had a lot of involvement in vulnerability disclosure. And in fact, on the topic of public policy, this picture right here, this is me testifying to US Congress on the role of researchers. And you can see in the picture, I'm sort of brandishing this toy pig. The story here is the purpose of the pig is to enable people to communicate with children remotely. And a researcher that I know, he had bought one to give to his niece so that he could talk to her, but thought, before I give it, I should probably check it. So he took a look and he found that due to a glitch, it would be possible for unintended people to access information about the child, perhaps even communicate with the child. So he went to disclose this to the manufacturer, who, as a startup, perhaps not terribly familiar with researchers, perhaps worried about reputational impact, took a very defensive approach, threatened legal action, didn't want to communicate with the researcher at all. Now, in this case, fortunately, the researcher was very persistent, he was very calm, he was very measured, and over time, he was able to build trust with the manufacturer, and they ended up working together and addressing the issue. However, frequently it doesn't go that way. Frequently what happens is we start off with an adversarial relationship between the researcher and the manufacturer, and things devolve quickly. The researcher becomes dejected and decides to disclose without the manufacturer. The manufacturer takes a defensive position and ends up with more of a reputational hit than they might have done had they participated in the process. And the customers and end users end up confused, worried. It's not a particularly good outcome for anybody. So my goal with this talk, and this talk is really sort of aimed much more at the manufacturer side, my goal is to try and help educate on who security researchers are, what they care about, what they're motivated by, so that hopefully it becomes easier for you to work with them and you can start finding common ground and a path forward to get to better outcomes. So the first step is that, in fact, vulnerability disclosure is a negotiation. You know, you come to the table, the researchers on one side, you're on the other, you have different points of view, you come from a different background, you're potentially looking for a different outcome, you care about different things, and yet you have to find a path forward together. This is a negotiation. So the key here is to understand who you're dealing with, understand what they care about, understand what you really most care about and can do without and cannot move forward with, and then find some common ground and try and find a path forward. So let's start by trying to understand who the researchers are. So firstly, not all people that disclose vulnerabilities are what we term researchers. I would consider a researcher to be somebody who intentionally goes about to try and find vulnerabilities. So somebody here like my good friend Daryl Hyland, who is Rapid7's head of IoT research, he will go and he'll take a product and he'll intentionally take it apart to try and find the security issues and implications of using the product. And then he'll responsibly disclose that with the vendors and try and work through the process with them. Another example of an intentional researcher would be somebody who perhaps wants to make a name for themselves or is wanting to participate in a bug bounty, that kind of thing. An incidental discoverer, this is somebody who normally will come across an issue during the course of using the technology. And they weren't looking for it, but they found it. So I've got an example here of Fuse. So this is an IP telephony provider that Rapid7 uses. When we were in our rollout process, a number of people across the organization who are not in research roles, who are not, in fact, in technical roles, discovered issues just by using the technology. And they then reported these issues up to us on the leadership level. And as a good, responsible security company, we were able to then pass those discoveries on to the vendor. but nobody had gone looking for them at Rapid7. That was not intentional, it was incidental. Sometimes what happens is a sysadmin or a network admin will encounter an issue, and frequently they'll reach out to us and ask us if we can disclose for them, because if you're an incidental discoverer, you may not really want to get involved in the disclosure process. You may want to see the issue being resolved because your organization is using it and you don't want to be exposed to risk, but you may not really want to manage that disclosure process. The last section is accidental, and I consider this quite similar to incidental in that normally it comes about, you haven't gone looking for it, you found it accidentally, but it might be the case that you were doing something unexpected with the technology. So the example that I like is this 5-year-old boy here who very famously discovered a vulnerability in the Microsoft Xbox when his father put parental controls in place and he figured out how to circumvent them. His father was then savvy enough to disclose that to Microsoft, and I think the young man in question got free games for some period of time. So it all worked out well, but that's an accidental discovery. Understanding the difference between these is important because it will shape how the disclosure interacts with you. An intentional reporter is probably going to be looking to get more out of you. They're going to want more communication. They're going to want more participation, and they're going to have greater expectation. With incidental and accidental disclosures, it's much more likely that they just want to share the information to you and then have you move forward with it. And they probably won't really want to be involved in the process going forward after that. What matters to them is seeing the issue be resolved because they as users don't want to deal with the issue. So for the purposes of this talk, we're primarily going to focus on intentional. And the reason for that is, one, they're probably the ones who are going to disclose to you the most frequently. And they're going to be the most interested in having that engagement with you through the process. So what do intentional researchers look like? Well, the media would have you believe they look like this. And I'll be honest, I don't know so many people who wear a mask when they're doing research, although these days I think masks are quite fashionable, so who knows. I do know lots of people who have hoodies, but I think, you know, the idea of the researcher sitting in the shadows or hacking from their parents' basement is a little outdated. And in fact, when I did a sort of quick cursory glance over the IoTSF Conference website, what I found was these 8 fine gentlemen who all indicate in their bios some connection with vulnerability research in some way. Now, these guys, I mean, firstly, not one of them is wearing a hoodie in their headshot, which was I was quite disappointed by, but they are all strategic leaders in their organizations. These are serious people. They're doing this work with serious intent, and they're thoughtful about it. You know, they're organized, they have their act together, and they're doing it for real purpose and real value. So you cannot be dismissive about researchers. These are not kids, they're not miscreants. We have to stop thinking of them in that way and start thinking about how we work together. At the end of the day, we need to understand the motivations that do exist. So this is where we get to 5 Ps. And these are the 5 Ps of security researcher motivation. I'm going to start with the one that I think gets talked about the most at the moment. Seems to be a big topic since bug bounties and that kind of thing. This is profit. And I think when a researcher reaches out and asks about money, it can be very off-putting, it can be scary, you can feel like you're being extorted. And, you know, that is very concerning. It is absolutely okay to just sidestep the conversation around money. Engage with the researcher, be open, assume good intent, but just sidestep the topic of money. If a researcher really cares about getting to the right outcome, they'll share information with you and they'll be open. Yes, they may have asked about funding. And at the end of the day, you know, for many, this is a job and they do need to find a way to pay their bills. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to extort you. And they might be just as happy to share the information without getting any payout. Here's the thing. There are lots of ways to get money for a vulnerability if that's all you care about. You know, if you go and sell it on the black market, you'll get money. So if they reach out to you and they're disclosing to you directly, that basically indicates that money is not their top priority. That indicates that really their top priority is seeing this being addressed in an appropriate way. And so that gives you a runway to engage with them, and you should assume best intent. The other thing to note on profit is that there's more than one way to profit out of something, and you can reward a researcher for the time that they've put in and the effort they've put into working with you in other ways, even if you don't want to spend money with them. Something even as simple as a t-shirt can really go a long way. Recognizing somebody on your website, inviting them to speak at your conference, like these are all things that you can do to reward researchers and show goodwill. The second, which I guess again may seem a little self-serving, is prestige. Now, I do know a lot of researchers who want to make a name for themselves. They want to get credit. They might want column inches. They might want to speak at a conference. And again, that's okay. We are an industry. And at the end of the day, people do have to find jobs. And this is a resume building thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can work with them and you can find common ground on that. It doesn't have to be something that hurts you, them doing this. The key here is if you manage communication with them and if you work with them and you build trust and you engage through the process, then you can agree a timeline and you can agree a plan for going out publicly, and you can be part of that narrative. You can help shape that narrative. You could suggest doing a joint talk. You could suggest putting out a paper together. You could go to the press together. There's all sorts of ways of working together on this. And what happens is your customer base sees you working with the researchers. They see you taking security seriously. They see you being responsive, and it helps build trust. It helps build credibility. It shows that you care about the impact on your customers. So prestige can actually work well for you. The third bucket is patriotism, but this could also be allegiance to a cause, a group of people. We've seen this at work with things like Hack the Pentagon in the US. The work that recently has been done on election security is a strong sort of allegiance to the idea of democracy as well as the nation states. And I think, generally, patriotism, when it is the factor, is a big, strong driving factor. For most private companies, you may not see very much in terms of this being a motivating factor for researchers reaching out to you. But it's something to definitely bear in mind and to think about whether that is the key, because if so, it may be a very strong factor, and in which case you'll want to figure out how to navigate it. But again, you can find common ground based on this. We've seen that in the election security conversations. Nobody wants to see democracy defeated. So there is always a path forward to build a good alignment. The bottom two, puzzle and protection, these are the two that I see most commonly in the researchers I work with. I think a lot of the researchers I know started out as puzzlers. They were thrilled by the intellectual curiosity, the intellectual challenge. They wanted to take a thing apart and put it back together and understand all the workings of it. And they wanted to find something that nobody else had found. And I think that still is a driving force for some people. Now, the thing that's interesting about puzzler is researchers that are driven by the puzzling instinct, often once their intellectual curiosity is satisfied, they really sort of just want to move on to the next puzzle, the next challenge. And so, they'll come to you and they'll let you know because they want to see the right thing being done, but they may not be as invested in the process as some other types of researchers would be. They may be quite happy to let you know and leave it with you and then move on for them onto the next challenge. So again, it's good to know if you're dealing with somebody who that's the real key for them. And then the last one I will say is probably the category where the researchers that I work with most commonly today are based. I know a lot of security researchers who have a sort of feeling as if they are Neo and they see the Matrix, and they feel that it's their job to protect those who maybe don't have the same level of technical skill, aren't able to navigate security in the same way, don't necessarily know what the risks are around them. Now, the good thing about a protector is that they're not going to be cavalier or reckless with the information they have. They are very cautious and careful about protection. And so they're not going to want to create a hype cycle. They're not going to want to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They're really going to want to be very thoughtful in how they disclose. The flip side of that is they're going to want to be involved. They're going to hold you accountable. They're going to want to know that you're doing the right thing to protect customers, and they're going to take that very seriously. But if they see that behavior from you, if they hear you saying the right things about wanting to protect your customers, then they'll normally work closely with you. They'll align with you on a plan for disclosure. They'll align with your messaging, and you can go out hand in hand. And as I said earlier, you can use this to build more trust with your customers and to show how much you care about them. So the protectors are ones that you can work with closely if you can find that common ground. And at the end of the day, common ground is what it's all about. You know, you may come to the fight on different sides. You may have a different philosophy about how things should be handled. But if you can find that shared mission, that shared value, then you can move forward together to a better outcome. So to highlight what I'm talking about, I'm going to share a quick case study of how this worked in practice at Rapid7. So let's meet our researcher. This is Jay Radcliffe. Jay worked with Rapid7 for a number of years, and Jay is a type 1 diabetic. In 2016, Jay's doctor advised him that he should use an insulin pump that would be connected to him. And Jay, as a security researcher, thought, well, before I embed a piece of technology in myself, I would really like to understand what the risks might be. So he took his insulin pump home and he took a look at it, and he found that he could manipulate the data flow between the two different parts of the devices, and he could either disrupt traffic such that he could halt delivery of insulin, or he could spoof traffic such that he could push an overdose. Now, in extreme cases, either action could prove fatal. So this is obviously like pretty concerning. And as I said, Jay's diabetic, so he took this very personally, very seriously. He felt a strong sense of responsibility. So to him, it was very important to disclose it to the vendor and to make sure that the issue was addressed in an appropriate way. But one of the concerns was he did not want to cause panic or hysteria because he didn't want people to suddenly start ripping insulin pumps out of themselves, right? He wanted to be realistic and pragmatic and thoughtful. Again, strong protector gene in this one. So now here's where things get tricky, right? Because vulnerability disclosures are not always popular, and we know that. In this situation, we were dealing with a technology that had undoubtedly gone through an extensive approval process by regulators. And we were dealing with an issue that, again, in very extreme niche cases, could result in death. So you know you're likely to be dealing with a fair amount of contention, concern, worry, defensiveness. Like, no manufacturer is going to want to hear about this issue because it's very scary. So we were a little worried about the reception that we were going to receive. On top of that, we were dealing with Johnson & Johnson, who are a gigantic company. In fact, I think they might be a Fortune 50. And meanwhile, Rapid7 is like this little tiny speck compared to them. And at the time that we were disclosing, Johnson & Johnson was dealing with the talcum powder class action suit. And we realized, you know, in a situation like theirs, often when people kind of knock on their door and say, hey, there's a problem with the product, they're like, and meet all my lawyer friends that I have with me. And so we expected that Johnson & Johnson were not really going to give us much benefit of the doubt, that they were probably going to meet a sort of wall of lawyers, and that this conversation was probably not going to go very far. What we didn't count on was our security champion, Colin Morgan. Now, Colin, unbeknownst to us, had spent the 2 years prior inside Johnson & Johnson's security team, building support inside the company for a vulnerability triaging and handling program. He was actually a week away from launching it publicly when we knocked on his door. And because Colin had gone through this extraordinary process internally and had built understanding and knowledge around the vulnerability disclosure process, he built trust internally. Legal trusted him, comms trusted him, the products teams trusted him, and they were fine for him to be the central champion, for him to lead the charge, as it were. And Colin, because he also had experience with security and he had understood the security research community, he approached us and gave us the benefit of the doubt right from the beginning, which was a huge thing for us. Like, it made all the difference in the world for that to be the case. So with Colin, we were able to build common ground, and our big unifying factor was all of us really just wanted to make sure that we did the right thing for patient safety. So anytime we hit a stumbling block, we came back around to that. And there were stumbling blocks. There was definitely an education process. Johnson & Johnson took the decision, which was a huge decision, that they were going to proactively communicate out about the issue. Now, at this time, it was not a common thing. There were no security vendors who had really done this. And so for them to decide to do so was huge, and we were really, really supportive of that. And then they told us they would be sending out letters. Now, as a company that operates on the internet, deals with internet security, we were sort of like, what now? Like, what are letters? We didn't really understand. And so there was a whole education process to go through around the realities that their world was very different to our world, and that's how you communicate in their world. And it has an entire cadence, and they were expecting that it would be public when the last letters were received. And we were sort of like, well, that's not how it works. You know, it's public when the first letter is received. In a situation where we had an adversarial relationship, this would have completely devolved. We would have completely broken down communication. We would have refused to see each other's point of view. We would have stopped listening, and this would have become a mess. It's likely that we would have gone separate ways. But because we had 4 months of investing and building a relationship, building trust, building benefit of the doubt, because we had this phenomenal champion and we had this relationship, when we hit this stumbling block, we were able to talk through it. We were able to come to alignment. We went back to our number one factor, which was what's best for patient safety. And we determined a path forward. So we agreed we'd send out the letters, and we would time when the first wave would drop, and that's when we would all go public with our communication. And sure enough, when those first letters went out, somebody took a photo of it and put it online. And the potential is that could have caused hysteria, it could have caused panic. But because we had this united front and this combined message, and we were ready, it didn't. And in fact, what happened was the patients and the customers came back and they thanked us. They said, thank you for taking such a reasonable approach. Thank you for being so practical. Thank you for reassuring us. And the news coverage focused on the fact that Johnson & Johnson had gone out with this message and had taken this action. Not Rapid7 against Johnson & Johnson, not the FDA against Johnson & Johnson, but Johnson & Johnson doing it, which built trust and it built credibility for them. And in the end, the FDA came out and said, this is the example that we want to see other medical device manufacturers follow. So this was a great thing for building Johnson & Johnson's credibility in the medical device space. So the point of all of this is, if you can give the benefit of the doubt, if you can create empathy, if you can find common ground and build alliance, you can actually create much better outcomes, not just for the researcher, but for yourselves and for your customers. Thank you for your time.